Going on.
So I'm Detective Courtney with the San Juan County Sheriff's Office. Also present is Detective Ben Coma with FPD. Mr. Titus is representing Officer Weaver. So it's the stance of the 11th Judicial District Attorney's Office that we're going to start reading Miranda on all these. Okay, so bear with me real quick. You have your attorney with you, but you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say may be used against you. You have the right to consult with an attorney before you ask any questions and to have them present during questioning. If you cannot afford an attorney, one would be provided to you at no cost. If you decide to answer questions now without an attorney present, you still have the right to stop answering anytime. You understand me?
Yes.
Okay. We'll just jump right into it. How many years have you been a police officer and with what agencies?
I have been certified since December of 2020. From June 2020 to that December 2020 mark, I was at the Academy, employed by the San Juan County Sheriff's Office. From December 2020 to October 2024, I was employed by the San Juan County Sheriff's Office. As of March, I don't know the exact date, March 2025, I've been employed by the Bloomfield Police Department.
What's your rank and badge number with Bloomfield?
I'm a patrolman, badge number 303.
On the date of the use of force, what was your call sign?
3129.
What type of training have you received in use of force or defensive actions?
I've received a multitude of training, starting out in the Academy on use of force, case law behind use of force, various scenarios using force. Since then, I have completed basic SWAT school, which speaks more in depth on use of force, as well as an advanced tactical workshop with use of force. Also, mandatory in-service training by the state of New Mexico for use of force.
When did you attend the SWAT school?
I think it was June or July of 22. And that was put on by Farmington Police.
One thing I wanted to ask you, the question's back here, but I wanted to, before we get into it, I did right here. Did you have a chance to review your footage from this incident yet?
Yes.
You have, okay. I wanted to see if, going off recollection on it, what type of firearms trainings have you had, and are you a firearms instructor?
I am not a firearms instructor.
Okay.
I received the basic training in the Academy. New Mexico required in-service training. And when I say training, this is with handgun, rifle, shotgun. Advanced training I've received was given me multiple SWAT trainings. I don't know the exact number, with the San Juan County Sheriff's Office, the basic SWAT school, and the advanced tactical workshop I mentioned earlier.
Okay, and you mentioned, and maybe I missed it, you talked about annual trainings. Does your annual trainings include firearms stuff then too? Or?
Yes.
What type of training have you had in verbal communication or CIT?
Similar to firearms, received the CIT, crisis intervention training in the Academy, and I believe it's yearly in-service with both Bloomfield Police and the San Juan County Sheriff's Office in crisis intervention training. They talk about different techniques to talk to people in crisis. We go over scenarios.
What type of training have you had in non-lethal and less lethal defensive action?
I have received taser training in the Academy, pepper spray in the Academy, as well as 2 weeks of defensive tactics, which is includes a small part of impact weapons such as batons, but the majority of it is empty-handed defensive tactics. Since then, I believe I've attended 2 in-service trainings for defensive tactics, and I'm sure it's more, but at least 1 taser training and OC training.
How about in SWAT school? Did you attend? Did you guys go over anything as far as this people?
I do not recall.
What crime were you investigating prior to the defensive action?
Prior to the defensive action, you're saying my reasoning for being there?
Yeah. What was that you know of? What was the crime or reason for stop? Any of them?
From Officer Ontiveros said on the radio, we were there for, or he stopped the guy because he had a headlamp out. When I arrived, I noticed that the male was concealing his identity, as well as resisting for refusing to exit the vehicle or roll the window down.
Okay. You have been able to review your body-worn camera?
Yes.
Okay, just want to make sure. So what I'm going to do at this point, and I'll have follow-up questions, and you might answer some of them as you're explaining it to me, but in the best detail that you can from start to finish of the incident, can you just walk me through it?
Yes.
And you might answer a bunch of questions I have, but I'll just mark those off. So I'll just let you go.
So I was on a traffic stop at the 121 South Bloomfield Boulevard Speedway. Don't recall the names of anyone involved with that. The female driver had a suspended or surrendered license. As I was typing my citation for that, Officer Ontiveros called dispatch and asked for a second. I believe that Sergeant Wells asked him what he had. Officer Ontiveros explained that he was on a traffic stop with a male for the headlamp that was out. The male was concealing his identity. Officer Ontiveros wanted to identify him so he could cite him. And that's according to Officer Ontiveros. From that point, I gave license and whatever documents back to the driver of the stop I was on. I began running lights and sirens to Ontiveros, who was, I believe he was at Jordan and East Broadway Boulevard. As I was running lights and sirens, Sergeant Wells asked Ontiveros if he needed 1018, so he's asking if he needs an expedited response from me as the backup officer. Ontiveros says no, and that's actually when he says that he's concealing and he needs to get his name to cite him. So I turned my lights and sirens off, continued driving eastbound. I arrive at Jordan and East Broadway. We're just north of East Broadway. I pull behind Ontiveros and exit the vehicle. I grab stop stick, tire deflation devices out of the back of my unit. I approach the vehicle. I see that Officer Ontiveros is talking to the male at the window. I throw the stop sticks underneath the truck. I tell the male, I don't remember exactly what I said. I tell the male to roll his window down, provide his ID. He refuses. I introduce myself as Officer Weaver. The male is continuing to argue. He presses his ID up against the window of the truck. When I observed that, I don't remember what exactly was covered. He had coverings on the driver's license. I said, that's not going to work. You need to provide it in my hand. He does not. So at that point, I decide that since he's concealing his identity, he's actively resisting my demands to exit the truck. I don't know how many times I told him to exit the truck or roll down the window, but he's resisting both of those commands. So I pull out my pocket knife from my pocket on my right side, has a window breaker on the end of it. I'm about to break the window. Officer Ontiveros tells me to hold on. He tries to negotiate further with the male. And the male, it was difficult to hear over the engine of his truck and the window being mostly cracked. I think there was that much in it, that much down. but he was explaining something along the lines of, this is New Mexico state law, I don't have to, blah, blah, blah. At that point, I start attempting to break the window by hitting the bottom corner of the window with my window breaker. It's not breaking. I don't know how many times I struck the window with that. I believe that I asked Officer Ontiveros if he had a window breaker, which he said he did. I said, pop it. Officer Ontiveros was hesitant to grab it, and so I said, pop it. He's actively resisting. Officer Ontiveros does not deploy the window breaker and continues to try to negotiate with the male. So I walked back to my unit to get my gloves, because at this point I'm believing that we're going to have to break the window to effect an arrest of this male. I thought the gloves were on the driver's side. They were not, so I went around to the passenger side of my unit, grabbed my gloves, put them on. I believe that I walked back up to the driver's window and began striking the window again with the window breaker, and it failed again. So I was going to walk around the front of the vehicle, of the male's truck, to break the passenger window. I decided that was not a safe approach, in case the male decided to drive off or whatever it may be. So I went behind his truck to his passenger window, began striking it, was unsuccessful again. So I put the pocket knife back in my pocket and went to my unit on the driver's side. There was a docked metal flashlight that would be near my right knee as I was driving. I pulled that out. I walked up to the window as Officer Ontiveros was talking to the male occupant. With my right hand, I struck the window at the top. One time, it didn't break. I struck it again. The window shattered. As I was moving in to effect an arrest, I saw a firearm, a handgun, a black handgun, and I heard a shot. At that time, I did not know that Officer Ontiveros had been hit. I retreated to a position of cover at the back passenger side, or back passenger corner of the male's truck. Because at that point I did not have my firearm out. I needed to create some time and distance. From that point, I fired, I do not know how many rounds. I remember there was like a mesh headache crack thing on his truck, and there was a part in the back window, the middle, that did not have that mesh covering. I recall intending to aim for the driver's seat through that window to avoid the mesh and any deflection of my projectiles. I do not know the total number of shots I fired. With my gun in my hand still, I approached the passenger window where I saw the male get a firearm in his hand, and as I was looking at him, the firearm his arm was slowly falling into the area of his lap. I gave commands to the male. If he moved, he was going to be shot. That's not verbatim what I said, but along those lines. I called out for Officer Ontiveros to see if he was hit. I was not sure if he ran, if he was shooting back at the male. I did not get a response from Officer Ontiveros, so I went back behind the suspect's truck and peeked around the driver's side rear corner I observed Officer Ontiveros laying on the ground with what appeared to be blood around him. At that time, Sergeant Wells was arriving on scene. I told Wells to work on Ontiveros, and I would cover him. So I went to the front passenger corner of the truck. For the most part, I believe I was moving around at some points, but from that front passenger corner, I could see the male, I could see the firearm. If you were to move, I were to be able to take action still. At this point, I wasn't sure that the male was deceased. I hadn't seen any obviously fatal wounds. I maintained that position. I believe that, I don't know how far into this, I broke the passenger side window as well, because my thinking was, I had remembered trainings where they talked about ballistic deflection off windshields. If you were to shoot through a windshield, there can be some issues with deflection and where your projectile is going to impact. So I remember breaking the passenger window in case I needed to take action from that window as well. Eventually, I remember fire arriving on scene. I asked Wells if he could drag Ontiveros back, because Wells and the fire guy were, directly 90 degrees from the suspect's window. They said they couldn't. Wells said something along the lines of he was holding pressure on Ontiveros, one of his wounds. Eventually, medics arrived. They moved him. I believe I moved to the driver's side of the suspect's truck, where I saw what I believe to be blood and matter coming from his left ear, which is when I realized he may be deceased. Officer Lynch then arrived and maintained cover on the suspect, and I helped medics put Ontiveros on the stretcher and get him loaded into the back of the ambulance. At that point, I didn't quite have a job on scene. Wasn't quite sure what I could do to help. When Wells took me to his unit, because I believe he was aware that I had fired rounds, he turned my body camera off and placed me in his unit. So.
Okay. I have a couple questions from how you were explaining that. So, what about the call, or what Officer Ontiveros said over the radio made you think of stop sticks?
In my training experience, when people are concealing their identity, it is possible that they will try to flee the traffic stop. To prevent that from happening, if I have any indication, whether it be past dealings with a certain individual I'm contacting, perhaps their criminal history, if I know at the time, or indications on scene that they may flee, I will put stop sticks down.
Okay. You mentioned that his window was just slightly rolled down.
Yes.
Not only did that make it hard to hear him, and did you have to raise your voice to talk to him as well?
I did, and I don't know if it was a diesel truck. It was a very loud truck. The engine was ticking. I had to have a raised voice to speak with the male, and I couldn't hear most of what he was saying from his position.
Okay, and then I'll have more questions on this, but you said you saw a handgun, and I might have missed it, but did you hear shots? You saw the handgun, but did you hear shots as well?
I saw the handgun. I heard a shot, and at that point, my ears were ringing. I knew that this was a lethal force situation. because I saw where the handgun was directed to, and that was towards Officer Ontiveros.
Okay. Did you have any follow-up questions just from what he was?
No.
I've got some more, but you kind of articulated some of this, but were you identifiable as a law enforcement officer that day?
Yes, I was displaying my badge of office. My sleeves had Bloomfield police patches on them, as well as Officer Ontiveros' lights and marked unit behind the truck. I also had mine behind Officer Ontiveros' unit. And I identified him. Hey, I'm Officer Weaver.
Okay. Yeah, you did articulate that. Do you remember what all tools and gear you had on your person when the incident occurred?
Are you asking about?
Yeah. It could be anything: handcuffs,
Yeah.
pepper spray, everything you had on you.
Okay. I had 2 pairs of hinge handcuffs, handcuff key. I had a taser. I had OC spray. I had my Glock 17 firearm. I had 2 magazines for that firearm. I had my ballistic vest. I had my body-worn camera. A pocket knife with window breaker. Duty belt, tourniquet. And a handheld flashlight, as well as my radio.
Good.
About any recording device or
Body-worn camera, and my unit had a dash cam that was turned on and activated as well.
Okay. You answered that one already. You kind of spoke about this. Was your emergency equipment activated, or which part of it was activated?
My front, side, and rear lights were activated. I do not believe my spotlight was.
You already articulated this. Was there any other officers on scene when the use of force occurred besides you and Ontiveros?
No, sir.
Did you feel in control of the situation, and if not, why?
I did not feel in control. And I'm speaking to when the firearm was presented and thereafter. Saw the handgun, I heard the shot, and from that point I remember feeling in fear for my life and in fear for Ontiveros' life. I did not have my gun drawn, so it's the extra added aspect that I had to reposition a position of cover to draw my firearm and potentially have to return fire to the subject. Not feel in control. I remember feeling scared. So.
Was there a point in the situation where you felt in control, and if you did, when?
I didn't even feel in control when we were trying to break the window, because there's still the unknowns with having to do that. One, but break the window. 2, effect an arrest. I didn't feel in control until Ontiveros' body was loaded up and I was placed inside Wells' truck.
You kind of already answered this one, but I'll ask it again anyways. Did the suspect comply?
No, I did not.
You kind of explained this as well already, but what did he do or not do to not comply?
He exhibited an identification that was covered. He refused to exit the vehicle when told to do so. He refused to roll down the window when told to do so. Even when I escalated and began attempting to break the window. He still failed to comply.
Some of these might seem redundant, but it's so that we can get all the information. Okay, I apologize. Did the suspect present an immediate threat to the safety of you or other officers?
Absolutely.
And to the public?
Absolutely.
You answered this, but I'm going to ask it again. Was the suspect armed, and if so, what was the threat?
He was armed. He was armed with, all I knew at that time was a handgun.
Okay. When the suspect completed his action or acted the way he did, what were you thinking and what did you feel?
I remember feeling more fear than I've ever felt in my life. Not only for me, but for Ontiveros. I remember thinking I've got to move, and I've got to, address this situation. That's all I can really remember thinking.
You answered this one. You did discharge your weapon?
Yes.
How did it make you feel personally to use the force you used?
I didn't have a feeling when using that.
How did you feel personally in reference to the threat that he presented?
Terrified. Terrified for me, terrified for Ontiveros, terrified for the citizens in that area.
How would you describe the suspect's demeanor?
Calculated, calm.
How fast was the threat presented?
It was immediate. It was split second, it felt like.
So based on Tennessee v. Garner, which we're all familiar with, when feasible, it is suggested by the courts that law enforcement give a warning prior to using deadly force. Was there time to do so in this incident?
It was not feasible to do so in this specific scenario.
And like I said, some of these are going to be kind of redundant. To the best of your knowledge, please describe the suspect's body language, facial expressions, movements, those sorts of things.
He appeared calm, even when, being commanded to do something. He seemed unwavering in his belief that he didn't have to comply with us. He didn't really have an expression on his face. His eyes were wide, and he was looking at both of us. Kind of back and forth is what it felt like.
Answered. I got another question that's not on here. Can you describe the suspect's vehicle to me to the best you can to detail?
It's not going to be very good. It's I remember it being an older Dodge pickup. It seemed lifted to me. He had the two mesh headache rack type things, referring to in the back that left the middle. That's about as much as I remember of that truck.
So you say, okay, you said it was lifted. You're a taller guy. Were you able to see inside the vehicle? Okay.
Not to the point where I was 100% confident. There was no threat in that vehicle, and at one point I had to get on my tippy toes to kind of look into the vehicle, and I was still unable to observe anything. So,
From being on that scene next to the truck, do you believe Officer Ontiveros could have seen into the truck?
it's probably unlikely.
Do you remember if the windows were tinted or anything?
I believed at the time they were tinted. They were not the darkest I'd ever seen, but they were not clear glass.
How fast was your reaction to the threat?
It felt immediate, as quick as possible once the subject presented the firearm, and that shot went off. That it felt like I had immediately decided to turn and reposition myself.
What information did you know about the suspect prior to this action?
Nothing.
As far as you know, you've never dealt with this individual?
As far as I know.
At what point did you stop using the defensive action or use of force, and why?
It's difficult to describe it at what point, because I'm not sure how many shots I fired into the truck. I struggle to give a reason as to why, besides there wasn't shots going off that I was able to tell. There wasn't any further movement that I was able to observe.
No more movement from the individual or the suspect, is what you're saying?
The truck, yes, sir.
Did you render aid after the use of force, and if not, why?
I did not, because the mail had as well as arrived and began rendering aid to Officer Ontiveros. I was not confident that the male was deceased at that time. He still had the gun in his hand. I was able to see he still had a finger on his trigger. And from what I recall, the gun was still pointed towards the driver's side door. So I believed it would not have been safe for me to do so.
Do you know if at any time some type of aid or checking for any type of life signs was done on scene with the suspect?
I do not recall.
Have you ever had to use deadly force prior to this incident?
No.
All right, stay with me on this one. Have you been confronted with the option to use deadly force and not used it? Why or why not?
Sorry, I gotta think a little bit.
If you need me to ask it again, I will.
I'm not saying that hasn't happened. I cannot recall a time
Okay.
where the option has been presented to me.
Let me ask it a different way. Have you ever had to draw your duty firearm and present it to someone and then transition to something else? And why did that happen at that time?
Yes. Do you want me to list off all of them?
As many as you want.
Okay. There was one, I do not know the exact date, probably a few weeks prior to this incident, where I was on a high risk stop with Officer Ontiveros. Tried to stop a vehicle for roadways lane for traffic. The vehicle fled before stopping again. I had my firearm out, called the driver out, got her detained, went to the passenger side. There was a subject who looked like he had a bulge in the left leg of his pants. I told him not to reach for it while at the low ready. He reached for his waistband. I believe I pointed my firearm at him and he eventually complied. At one point, while working for the sheriff's office, I don't even know an approximate date, I was searching for a suspect in a domestic violence, found him hiding in a bush. His hands were concealed. He refused to show them. I pointed my gun at him. He then showed his hands. I know that there's more incidents that are not quite coming to mind though.
That's fine. That's fine. So, but you've had to, since you've been a cop, you've had to draw your firearm, present it to people.
Yes.
And they've become compliant at that point.
And at that point, I either holster or remove my sights of my firearm from their person because they're not a threat at that point.
Okay. Did the suspect, a citizen, or law enforcement sustain injuries during this use of force?
Yes, an officer and Officer Ontiveros and the citizen who shot Officer Ontiveros.
So the injuries that were sustained during this use of force, both with Ontiveros and the citizen that you're speaking of, how did this make you feel?
It makes me feel, it's difficult to put a word to it, just sad for all involved.
After this incident, did you have a buddy officer? And if so, who was it?
I did. It was Officer Dylan Favorino, who's also employed by Bloomfield Police.
Have you documented or written a report for this incident?
I have not.
Have you prepared a use of force document
No.
or anything like that? Is there anything of importance that you'd like to mention that I've missed throughout this questioning? Anything you can think of that I haven't asked about? Let me just check a few things. So you did, you were in your full Bloomfield PD uniform?
Yep. Displaying my badge of office.
Displaying badge of office. We talked about your equipment. And there's nothing that you can think of that you'd like to. You have any follow up? All right, I'm gonna go off.